Order, and welcome to this Treasury Committee evidence session on the work of the Financial Ombudsman Service. Abby, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Abby Thomas, and I'm the CEO and Chief Ombudsman at the Financial Ombudsman Service.
Thank you. And Abby, I think you've been in post now well over a year, haven't you? What would you say you've chalked up in terms of your major successes and achievements since you started?
Thank you. Yes, I've been in post now just under 18 months. And during that time, we've worked hard together as a team. And I think our key priority has been to at least maintain the quality of the service that we provide to our customers, be they complainant or businesses, but to improve the time it takes us to resolve cases. And I think we've been successful in those two objectives. On the quality front, we measure quality across a number of different metrics, but the blended score has improved over that time period to 94% from 92%. On the timeliness front, I think we've made a significant improvement. So at the end of the prior financial year, we were closing 30% of our cases in 3 months. That has now gone up to 57%. Still more to do, but significantly improved. Similarly, at the end of last year, we were closing 55% of our cases within 6 months. That's now at 82% and rising. And I'm really pleased we've been able to bring that certainty to our customers more quickly without compromising on the quality of the service that we provide.
So any other achievements you want to highlight?
I think those are probably the outcomes our customers value the most. In terms of how we've achieved it, I think we've built a sustainable foundation for success in the future, really focusing on our digital transformation to improve both our self-service capabilities for customers and the tools that we provide our caseworkers, but also our people transformation as well, setting up specialist units dedicated to specific products so that every customer who comes to us knows that the person they're speaking to understands their case, understands the context that that case has arisen in. I think that has been really helpful for our customers, but also for our people.
So what are the things that you hope to improve further this year then?
I think we do have some areas for focus. So we want to, again, at least maintain that quality, but continue to improve on timeliness. We've set some ambitious service standards, and we've published those as well so that everyone can see the progress that we're making and that we still intend to make. So there'll be a further focus on timeliness. I think that in addition, there's probably more we can do from a digital perspective. Last year, we did achieve a lot in the digital space, but I think there's still more to do. Again, particularly from a self-service perspective, giving customers control of their own cases. And I think there are also new casework types that are coming to the fore that also require more attention. So, of course, I know this committee is very aware of the work on authorised push payment fraud and the mandatory reimbursement regime. We are making sure that we're ready to work in that manner.
And we'll be asking some more detailed questions on that.
Thank you. And motor finance would probably be the other casework highlight again.
And we'll also be asking you some more detailed questions on that. But, I mean, there is still a backlog, isn't there? You haven't mentioned the backlog once, and you were aiming to get rid of it, and there is still a backlog.
It's much reduced. We look now at cases which is simply how many cases do we have which are over 12 months old. And by that measure, we reduced backlog. Last time I was here, it was at 13,000. It's now at just over 10,000, 10,500 cases over 12 months old. Some held behind litigation, so we can't progress those cases just yet. Some relating to motor finance, where we've worked to formulate our position on those cases and recently issued some final decisions. And some more that I agree we very much want to address. So our target for next year is to reduce that number significantly.
But you did want to get rid of the over 18-month cases completely. You wanted to completely eliminate that backlog, but you still seem to have the data I've got here, 7,500 cases over 18 months.
I believe that was from the end of 22-23. I suspect that number has changed since.
You know what it is now, over 18 months?
I can confirm that to you in writing, but the reason I don't have it to hand is because we are really focused on any case that's over 12 months old. That to us is the cut-off point that goes, into the area where it's just not helpful to a customer. So we've really focused internally on 12 months being our cut-off point. Of course, I can provide you with that information separately.
It's not zero, though, is it? You haven't
it won't
that.
be zero, no.
You'd be telling us if you'd achieved that, I think.
Yeah, it won't be zero at this moment. And again, sometimes there are objective reasons for that, like litigation.
One of the things that we hear feedback about the Financial Ombudsman very often is about inconsistency in decisions, so that you can have two identical cases and they can be treated completely differently by your casework team. Do you recognise that criticism?
Not really. I have heard it, I should say that, but I have not been provided with details of cases where, superficially on the facts provided in the decision, you can see a clear difference of approach from one ombudsman to the next. And I think that's because we've worked hard in our processes to make sure we are giving that consistency and therefore predictability to businesses of what they should seek to achieve on behalf of their customers. So we have a very robust quality assurance process that helps us with our consistency. Every case, every view, the first stage of our process that gets issued, 1 in every 15 get quality assessed. When that moves to the Ombudsman stage, 1 in every 25 would be subject to a further assessment. That helps us with quality and consistency. So does the knowledge management that we use to help people doing their cases. So does our induction training and ongoing in-life training as well. They're all predicated to ensure that wherever possible, where the facts are similar, we're giving a similar answer. I will, however, point out that every customer is actually different. Particularly on the complainant customer side, we put a lot of thought, as is appropriate, I think, into their personal circumstances, potentially a level of vulnerability. That sometimes makes a difference to the decisions that we make. We wouldn't necessarily spell that out in the decision as we publish it on our website for the purposes of the privacy of the individual. But it does make we are bound, and I think it is very important to consider those individual factors in our decisions.
Well, the other piece of feedback we get is that the Ombudsman service is not consistent with what other regulators are requiring. So you'll be aware that, for example, with defined benefit, British Steel defined benefit cases, that the FCA uses one way of valuing those liabilities, but case outcomes at the Financial Ombudsman Service have actually used a critical yield methodology, a different methodology altogether to evaluate. So it's very difficult for businesses to get a consistent view between regulators.
I suspect British Steel is something of a special case. If I may set out very briefly why. In the British Steel scenario, initially when complainants approached us, as we would for any other case, we looked at it on a case-by-case basis and used our standard approach to pension redress calculation. When the FCA started to investigate the situation with the British Steel pension holders, they put in place a scheme, and one facet of the scheme was a defined method for calculating redress that was communicated to industry. We worked with the FCA to help define that redress approach, and actually our role now is to check that industry or the respondent businesses on the other side of that dispute are applying that methodology in a consistent manner. So I feel we've worked hand in hand with the FCA, at the point that the scheme was announced and subsequent to that, which is probably over a year now. And we've tried not only to work with them on the cases and on the redress scheme, but also in our engagement. So we've gone out with the FCA to talk to those communities that are affected so at least they know what to expect. And also the businesses too. So I think we're actually very aligned with the FCA, but I do appreciate that, again, for British Steel, there has been that change of approach from a more complaints-led approach to a more scheme-led approach, which probably has slightly changed the methodology and use as a result.
So it's in that context that people are looking at the new consumer duty that came into force last July, and wondering, what they can look to as being the basis on which the Financial Ombudsman will look at cases where the consumer duty has been alleged to have been breached.
So the consumer duty was a big milestone for the financial services industry. Again, we spent a lot of time engaging directly with respondent businesses, also through trade associations like UK Finance, to give as much awareness as possible, both of the duty and of our likely approach to it. I myself joined the organisation at roughly the point that the implementation plans were being prepared. And my observation at that point was, I feel the consumer duty is very aligned to the way that the Financial Ombudsman Service has always worked. So if you look at the requirement of the consumer duty to offer good outcomes, and you look underneath that at the key pillars that the FCA are pointing to, like consumer understanding or the requirement to avoid foreseeable harm, I think that's absolutely aligned with what the Financial Ombudsman Service has always sought to do, which is ensure fair and reasonable treatment of consumers. So when we look at cases now, although we do tag them where that case has arisen in the consumer duty sort of time period, the qualifying period for the duty to come into force, we don't see a huge difference at the moment between cases that we look at post the consumer duty and cases that we looked at pre the consumer duty. We're really looking for the same core principles to be observed.
Are people bringing forward cases prompted by the consumer duty that might not have been brought forward before?
Not to my knowledge. That's not something that's cited by the consumers themselves, the complainants that bring the cases to it. It is still quite early from our perspective. Although the implementation date was July for open book cases, there's a lag period where the issue or error needs to have occurred, and then the business gets the opportunity to resolve it. So I think this is an area that we'll continue to monitor. But at the moment, we're not seeing an excessive number of cases overall. We're not seeing consumer duty cited by those complainant customers. But of course, we are talking to businesses. And one observation I might share quickly, the Financial Ombudsman Service typically had a lot of cases around the beginning or the end of a process from the customer's perspective. So the sale of the product, or perhaps the renewal, the transfer, the upgrade, the claim. I am interested, and my team and I are looking into the fair value component of consumer duty, which really shines a light on the intervening period, how customers are using the product day to day, and the fees and charges that we're paying. So my question with consumer duty is not, will it change the volumes of cases that we receive? It hasn't to date. But will it change the mix? And again, it hasn't to date, but it's a little too early, I think, to reflect too deeply on that.
You've run a consultation on charging professional representatives a fee. Where has that got to?
Yes, so we've closed the consultation now. We had a very healthy response to the consultation from across a spectrum of consultation respondees. So, for example, we had feedback from businesses, from consumer groups and charities, from claims management companies themselves. On balance, I would say that the people responding were in support of our recommendation, and in support of the Treasury approach, which is to enable us to charge those fees. Of course, that's not universally true. There were some parties who were less pleased by it as a proposal. But the aspect that we still, I think, need to reflect on and make sure we get right is just making sure that if we were to charge a claims management company or professional representative, first of all, to see what safeguards could be put in place to make sure that's not passed back to the consumer customer. And second of all, just to ensure, as we do with all our cases, that we're really thinking about vulnerable customers too, and they're not disadvantaged by this proposal. So with those two aspects in mind, and with the requirement to consult on the detail of the sort of the fee terms and conditions, so to speak, we will be going out for a further, more targeted consultation in the next few months.
So in the next few months, where does that take us to?
It still means that we could potentially implement, if we were to implement a fee, we could potentially implement it in October. It's not a longer timetable per se. It's just because we had to go out and consult on the detailed, the actual detail of the proposal. We're going to take that opportunity just to look at those two other questions.
Okay. Thank you. Turning to our inquiry into access to finance for small and medium-sized businesses, you'll have been following that and the sort of debate around small businesses and the level, and then whether or not the Financial Ombudsman Service really has the capability to deal with some of these small business complaints. You know, you'll have seen some of the evidence we've had, but you're not. Would you like to comment on those?
Yes. First of all, I will say that I'm really proud of the work we do for the small business community and the 6,500 cases we resolve a year from business customers. We have a dedicated team that work on these cases. They were recruited in the last few years post the expansion of our jurisdiction on this basis, so I think they've got really strong skill set and the ability to undertake this work. And we also have additional support, recognising that the SME challenges are slightly different from those of a consumer. So on the one hand, we have an advisory body that would comprise of organisations that can speak really knowledgeably for the SME community, like the Federation of Small Businesses or Chambers of Commerce. On the other hand, we also have an expert panel who were recruited for really specific but impactful and important issues that might affect an SME complaint, like tax treatments, accounting treatments, and so on. So I think that we are helping the small business community. I think, as with our other timeliness stats, we're doing so more quickly than before, and I think awareness is good of the service that we offer. You've
got a specialist team, but sometimes there are inconsistencies between the decisions they make for businesses and the decisions they make for consumers. We've heard that particularly it's around the way you handle the personal guarantee issue for small businesses.
So sometimes that's actually driven by our jurisdictional perimeter, if I can call it that. It's around what we're allowed to the type of cases we're allowed to look at. So, for example, if a business customer is pursued for a personal guarantee they did not in fact take out, and a consumer customer was put in the same position, we would be able to look at that consumer's complaint, but we wouldn't necessarily be able to look at that business customer's complaint, which I agree seems like a gap. Following the SME finance meeting, I wrote to the FCA with a list of gaps like that, where I think we could perhaps do more to help the small business community.
I think you mentioned commercial hiring and leasing in your evidence. So there's a letter out there that it will be quite interesting for this committee to see, I think.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to share that
with the committee with other gaps in addition to those ones you've already mentioned.
Yes,
okay,
right.
All right, we would love to see that. Thank you very much, because that was going to be my next question. Are there any other issues that you think should be within the scope of the FOS for small businesses?
I think personal guarantees is quite a big topic in its own right. My team have already met with the Federation of Small Businesses, but I would like to meet with them myself as well, and we're setting that up to look at some of the feedback that was raised, actually, as you say, off the back of the SME finance hearing, but also through our casework too. So I think that is an area where I don't think that that there is. I think there could be more clarity for the business customer that is being asked to consider that personal guarantee or is being subsequently pursued for that personal guarantee. I think there's more that we could do again, but there's some perimeter issues there that would need to be resolved.
Okay. Well, we look forward to seeing that letter with the full list. Stephen.
Good morning, and I'd like to ask you a few questions about debanking, if I may, please. In your letter, or the letter from the Ombudsman on the 6th of October to the committee, you set out some data, and obviously in terms of new banking cases, there was an increase of, I think, 11% 1 year, 7% the second year, and you gave half-year data for the year 23-24. I wonder three things, really. One is, could you give us some flavour of where the data is at the end of the year or as we approach the end of the year. Secondly, why you think the trends are showing this increase in number of complaints, the balance between general and restricted. And you also make the comment that you think new cases are more important than resolutions because you've dedicated more staff to resolutions. Is that still the case? So sort of 4 basic questions, sorry.
Yes, no problem. So let me work through them. So first of all, yes, we have seen over the past years an increase of activity in this area, and by that I mean an increase in complainants coming to us where they feel that their account has been restricted or closed inappropriately. We saw that in the last 2 years, so I don't think this is a new trend, but we certainly saw this particular year, particularly in the first half of the year, numbers did increase for us. That growth rate, if I may call it that, has subsequently tailed off. I think some of it may be driven by greater awareness because there's been a lot of coverage of this topic. So that possibly has had some impact. We drew attention to the difference between a general account closure and a restricted account closure because typically they're driven by different factors. This may not matter, to be frank, to the consumer customer because in the end they've got a bank account they can't use. I appreciate that, but from the bank's perspective, where we would describe an account closure as being restricted, that implies that the bank may have some concerns about inappropriate activity such as money laundering or similar. Where we've seen the increase is more on the general account closure side, which might indicate that the bank has seen account inactivity, not inappropriate activity, but just inactivity, or perhaps that the bank is seeking to exit a sector. And on the small business side, tying the 2 questions together, we have seen that perhaps increase a little as well. And
the balance of the increase has been that they've been more in the general as opposed to the restricted complaints.
Yes, but I think this is a very... we're not talking about a huge number of cases. We took probably 2,700-ish each year, and it may be sensible for me to write back to you to give you detail because, as I say, this year has been a year of change, and we've seen the numbers increase quite a lot more rapidly in the first half than the second. So I may confirm that in writing.
That would be helpful.
That would help.
The other couple of points were about the fact that you said that the number of new cases was more important than resolutions because you put more people onto. I just wanted to see whether, in terms of the debanking cases you've seen, whether you're still allocating more staff to resolution.
I think the point we were seeking to make there was the number of new cases gives a better indication of the current status of, how often does a bank seek to take that action for whatever reason. That is best judged by looking at how many times now customers are raising that issue to us. Our resolutions are absolutely our primary activity. That would mean we're issuing a view, which is our first stage, or a decision if that's been required from an ombudsman. That measure really tells you more about how much resource we've allocated to the area. It's not that one is more important than another. It's more that they tell you something different. Yeah.
But I am right in thinking that you haven't decreased the number of people working on resolutions in this area.
Not to my knowledge, no.
You would have seen, obviously, the recent all-parliamentary group report on fair banking. And I think, what do they say? They said in a report that lenders were freezing legitimate customers out of the financial system due to their opinions or lifestyles or because of cost. Can you say if you, in your investigations and the number of complaints coming to you, you have evidence to support that? And what, if so, has been the trend?
I would say we haven't seen evidence that on our caseload alone, and that is quite an important caveat, we haven't seen evidence that customers are routinely debanked on the grounds of political expression. We don't have cases of that nature very often. And so I haven't seen that trend. What we are more likely to see is, again, more commercial decision making on the part of the bank. So commercial decision making such as they no longer want to serve that sector. For example, there is I would say 25 or so cases from charities that have come to our service where the banks have sought to close access to their accounts. The uphold rate in that area is quite high. It's about 49%, which means we've found in favour of the charity 49% of the time. So that's one area where I think the banks have taken a certain approach, or in those 25 cases. I think the second area would be, again, concerns over some form of economic crime. And I think the third area is, again, more around account inactivity. Sometimes, perhaps some commercial considerations over the cost to serve those customers, like expats, for example. That again is an example of certain banks making commercial decisions on who they best want to serve, which again we would always look at. If anyone is concerned that they don't have access to their bank account and they need it for personal, for business reasons, we would always consider their case if they've given the bank the opportunity to resolve it first.
Can I just two questions on your answer? One is, I've recently had a constituency case where a constituent had an account closed because the bank thought they might have been money laundering. Actually, they'd banked with them for 20 years. There was no reason to suggest that. And after a discussion with the CEO, the bank admitted a mistake. Are you clear that the criteria that the bank are using within the restricted category that you've talked about is being transparently applied by the banks? First point, and then I'll come on to the second point.
Okay. So obviously the bank sometimes is not able to communicate transparently that they have that concern because, from the bank's perspective, they don't want to go too near any potential tipping off. Understood that. I think that where we have seen banks, where for those larger banks where we had a number of debanking cases with us, we wrote, my Deputy Chief Ombudsman wrote to individual banks separately to the CEO to say, please can you make sure you're addressing these cases as quickly as possible. And I would always hope that, as is their obligation, the banks are looking at our findings and applying that to their wider caseload.
Perhaps I used the word wrongly. I mean, absolutely get the point that they can't always transparently tell the customer. I guess what I'm asking is, are they applying those criteria consistently, in your opinion?
I really think we work on a case-by-case basis.
Inside particularly the inactivity and withdrawals, I guess from withdrawals that will affect a lot of small. But can you talk about inside the numbers you've seen so far, how much of that is affecting the small SME sector?
Yes, we had 300 complaints, I believe, in the latest data set we have on small business debanking complaints suggests we've received 300 complaints this year, against, again, a backdrop of 2,700 in total across personal and business customers.
And is that consistent as a ratio with the previous 2 or 3 years?
Perhaps I can reply back with more detail on that for you.
And in terms of that, is there any one of the rationales where those complaints are coming from?
No, I think it's a similar set of concerns that are raised around personal bank accounts. So again, account inactivity, commercial reasons, and so on. I don't think it's very different from the consumer side. But again, by all means, we can investigate those cases in a bit more detail to give you more of a thematic perspective.
That would be helpful for this and for our SME inquiry. And a couple of last questions. One, you will have seen in the recent APPG report that I referred to that the MPs heard testimony from industry sources that the FCA had encouraged banks to prioritise their reputation over duties to customers. I wondered whether your service had supported that claim, had any evidence to support that claim?
I'm not aware of that. Obviously, that is more a question for the FCA, but I haven't seen that advance in an argument myself. But again, we do have many cases with the service, so it's not something I'm aware of.
And one last question: in your data, over the last year, have you seen what has been the proportion of the increase that has been due to politically exposed persons?
We haven't seen cases that relate to politically exposed people, to my knowledge. We've seen, I think, a couple of cases where there was a group that was, or we have seen cases where the bank's perception was that a group may have had some association with extreme beliefs and also potentially some criminal activity. That was the nature of the bank's concern. But that would be it. It's not something that's commonly cited when people raise cases to us.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stephen. Siobhan.
Thank you. Abby, I'd like to talk about authorised push payment fraud reimbursement scams. A case was reported in the Sunday Times about a fraudulent property investment scheme. At least 81 people invested in the scheme, losing £7 million. Some people took their case to yourselves. The service has told 14 people that they cannot get a refund, but others have been told that the bank should reimburse them. It seems like some people are refunded for scams and some are not, depending on the day that you ask. Do we have a problem with how consistent the Ombudsman service is? Can you understand why to some people it seems like a complete lottery?
I can't reflect on that specific case or set of cases. But I will reflect on the banking landscape from an authorised push payment perspective, which is that there is quite a variance in treatment of customers in this space. So, at the moment, I broadly think there are three categories. There's those banks that haven't signed up to the CRM code, the contingent reimbursement model.
Sorry, Abby, would you mind just addressing whether you think that your service is inconsistent?
I don't believe we are, and I haven't had examples raised to me of major inconsistency. Back to the comments I made to the chair, of course we do look at the individual circumstances of a customer. It might be that a customer who is more vulnerable, perhaps under more financial or other pressures, might be in turn more susceptible to fraud and scams. We would absolutely take that into account and consider it when we're looking at what is the right standard of caution on behalf of that consumer. But when it comes to the facts of the case, what we're really looking at is what commitments have the banks made, in the form of signing up to the CRM code or other commitments like TSB's fraud guarantee, for example, and how they treated the customer at the point that they raised their complaint to them.
Yeah, in this Sunday Times article, it says that 31 people took their case to the Financial Ombudsman Service, which has recommended that the bank reimburse the customers under the voluntary code. But 14 investors had a letter from the Ombudsman saying it no longer recommends a refund because the scheme is not a scam.
Well, again, I can take that away and reply back to you. It does sound like there's some detail there to be considered. But I'm afraid I can't discuss the details of cases.
I can give you.
We're happy to respond.
If we move on to what seems like also inconsistency in the case of individual banks. Some banks, like Nationwide, refund 91% of fraud cases, but others, like Monzo, have only refunded 6% of fraud victims. Are some banks treating their customers worse than others? Do you have a trend? Do you know who the good banks are and who are the worst banks in terms of reimbursement?
So, as you're aware, the PSR published a report on this topic recently with all their data across all the banks, which I personally found very interesting reading. Again, I think it did show some variation across the banking landscape. The two areas I really looked at were what is the refund rate, but also what is the loss suffered, because I think it's important that banks can address both of those. I think it's important that banks are able to prevent the loss in the first place, and that's something at the Ombudsman Service we put a lot of attention on. They're issuing effective warnings, are they making sure their consumers are as protected as they can be, but also are they refunding and both the as many instances of fraud that occur and the value of that fraud as well. And that, I think, was the second dimension that really jumped out of the PSR report. And again, I would agree there's some variation in terms of which banks are acting as a sort of strong line of defence, and then which banks are refunding. And ideally, you really want the former. You want banks to try and it is in their interest too, of course, to try and stop the fraud from taking place, plus the refund.
Is the age of the bank and their IT equipment a factor in whether they can stop it from happening in the first place?
It may well be, but we wouldn't consider that a realistic or a good reason why not. We really need to, I think, walk in the consumer customer's shoes here and think what a distressing and upsetting experience of fraud is. And I would expect any bank to start from that perspective and to think about how can they help customers who, again, sometimes can be at a very vulnerable point in their lives, and stop them from being put in that position. It is not only on the banks, I must say that too. There are other industries that have a part to play in reducing the prevalence of fraud, and of course the ultimate initiator of all this is the fraudsters. That is absolutely true. But from a bank's perspective, I wouldn't expect them to cite legacy IT systems as a reason not to look after their customers. And indeed, I'm sure you'll come to mandatory reimbursement, but at the point that comes in, a lot of the kind of variation in practice should diminish as well. So banks should be preparing for that.
Would you think of preparing a league table?
We do share data on banking performance, so that is something we share. We're looking as part of our overall data strategy. It's one of our 3 core pillars in the service as to what more we could do in that space. But certainly already we're sharing data with the FCA and with the PSR as well, so that they have access to our insight as the
public,
PSR.
Though? Because it may inform their decision on who they have their bank account with.
Yes. Our overall strategy for the Financial Ombudsman Service, our 3-year strategy, can be summed up as saying we want customers who come to us, and that could be a complainant or a business, to feel that they received a better outcome, so they were put back in the place they would have been had the issue not occurred, or they are better informed. That's what we're really trying to get to. And I think the point you're making here is this is an opportunity for us to help them feel that better informed, ideally before any problem ever occurs. So yes, we would consider looking at what we can publish to help consumer customers and banks as well.
If we talk about your backlog and the difficulties you've had, and how large that is, how are you going to cope when the authorised push payment fraud reimbursement scheme is up and running? Because victims of fraud will become more aware of what they're entitled to. How are you going to manage the caseload then?
Yes, well, first of all, we have reduced the time it takes us on all cases, but also on fraud cases as well, despite the increasing array of tactics that fraudsters are using and the complexity of the cases. So that puts us in a better position. I think there is work for us to do, and we want to do that with industry so that they know what to expect from us ahead of the implementation timetable. And I think that some of the the digital transformation that I touched on very briefly at the beginning will help us with that, as well as making sure we have the right skilled and experienced people to support this work. At the very beginning of this financial year, we put in place a model where our caseworkers, investigators or ombudsmen, are now assigned to a product area. So we have dedicated fraud and scams teams. That wasn't necessarily the case consistently in prior years. I think that helps us too, because it means we have a team of people who are standing by, who really understand this area, understand how it feels. But
what happens when your caseload increases exponentially, and you might have car finance coming down the road as well? I'd advise you to swerve that one.
Well, no doubt we'll discuss motor finance perhaps a little later, so I'll stick to fraud and scams for now. We are preparing for that implementation. We think that will take effect in Q4. We are very aware of some of the changes that the PSR are planning to make and are working on our operational readiness to ensure that we are well prepared and that customers can still come to us and look to us for help.
Thank you, Siobhan. And is it possible that the caseload might actually go down in this area after that automatic reimbursement comes in?
I would really hope so. I will add a note of caution. Often we have found in the past when new regulation comes in, there's a bedding in period. There are some genuinely new features in the PSR's approach, particularly the way that responsibility will lie between the sending and the receiving banks as well. So, pragmatically, we are expecting some uplift at the end of the year, but hopefully it will resolve the picture after that.
I heard maybe.
Sure, if I just ask,
and there's one further question you had.
Buy now,
Siobhan.
pay later. Because
Yes.
you've got the push payments, you've got potentially the car finance, and you've also got potentially buy now, pay later. In February 2021, the government announced its intention to regulate buy now, pay later products. 3 years later, we're still waiting, and now we're hearing that the plans may be shelved. We still don't know the scope of the regulation or the date it would come into force. Does that make it harder for you to forecast the volume of cases you will receive in the future? Has the government indecision made your job harder?
So first of all, obviously we're aware that buy now, pay later is not yet in regulation, but could be. We've been preparing on that basis. We've had a project team mobilised and working on this for some months. I think buy now, pay later is interesting, because it's clearly a popular source of credit or similar to credit for a lot of people, but also because it's a product that is sold and served digitally. There's not often, any sort of human interaction when the customer takes on that product or uses that product. And I think we need to respond to that in kind. And that's why we are looking as part of our digital transformation as to how we can make it a lot easier to work, if you're a consumer customer, to come to the Financial Ombudsman Service, via our website. So, for example, we've changed our sort of raise a case journey online quite significantly, partly with future regulatory change for buy now, pay later in mind to better support that kind of customer and that kind of product. There's more for us to do here, but I think that's one way we can make sure that we're ready for that change when it arrives.
That quite worries me, because when we've discussed buy now, pay later on the committee, what we've discovered is a lot of people don't understand that buy now, pay later is credit. And you're going to be dealing with a group of people who potentially you don't see a great deal of at the moment. People who are poorer, more likely to be less able on your digital pathways. And there are a substantial number of people now using it as a way to buy their weekly food shopping. So you're going to deal with a lot of people on means-tested benefit, particularly universal credit, where 1 in 3 people in that category are now behind on the buy now, pay later repayments. How are you going to cope with a lot more vulnerable people, kind of less aware of the systems that are normally involved in making a complaint to the Financial Ombudsman? Because I don't really see that stick it on the website and that's the answer.
So absolutely that's not our intention. So first of all, today 60% of people contact the Financial Ombudsman Service using the phone initially, or by email because they're sending us case files and documentation. That we think works very well. We will always maintain that channel of choice for our customers. We will not be requiring any consumer customer to use the website. But I do think there's a group of customers who prefer that. Actually, it is not an easy conversation to have with a person to say, I'm in a lot of debt and I'm not able to get help for it. I think having the website as an alternative, not as the only means, but as an alternative, is really useful. On the broader vulnerability point, I could talk a lot more about this. I'll just say that we have initiated a really big training programme for all our staff, casework staff, which starts this coming year, so that they are really well equipped to deal with vulnerable customers to the very best of our ability. It's really important to us. So I think there's probably a much longer answer to your question, but we are both trying to make sure we're offering channels that work for the whole range of customers, whatever their background, and that when a vulnerable customer comes to us for help, we're dealing with them really well, as we would expect, frankly, of the banks or BNPL providers or any other provider.
All right. Thank you very much, Siobhan. Drew.
Good morning. I want to continue on a theme of future complaints, if I can. In your budget consultation, it indicates that the latest forecast for complaints is 179,000, below the original budget of 184,000. Why are the number of complaints lower than forecast?
So first of all, our pre-consultation budget did take a range of responses from businesses and interested parties. We're reflecting on that and building some of that into our budget. So our finalised budget is not quite the same as our consultation budget, and it is more likely to go up. Please bear with me as we work through that. Of course, I can provide you with more detail over the next few weeks. We have found over past years that the trend in terms of incoming complaints is largely flat. I think that when you consider that the consultation budget was issued before the FCA announcement on Motor Finance Commission, that's one reason why we might seek to use this opportunity to ensure we have forecast as precisely as we can. I will say as well, though, that the forecasting, while actually this year we've forecasted very precisely the volumes that we'd receive, we're not reliant on that alone, and I think it's incumbent on us not only to try and forecast correctly, but to build flexibility into our operations as well, so that we can cope with the ups and downs of a demand.
Let's just pursue that wee bit on car finance, because in the consultation it indicates that, and I think I'm quoting correctly, not seeing any increase in complaints about Car Finance Commission or the British Steel pension scheme that were incorporated into that forecast. But you've just said that there is likely to be movement on that. Will this trend materialise later then? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Right.
So this year we received for much of the year in the low thousands of complaints on motor finance in total. In the last couple of months, we've seen that number increase quite significantly, and we are now working, taking some insight from the FCA as well, to say, well, first of all, the FCA have changed the complaint handling rules, as you'll be aware. That will probably change the profile of our complaints and when we should expect them, pushing some towards the back end of the year. But in addition, there is probably greater awareness of motor finance currently. So we probably add in some more. And that is really one of the kind of responses that we got back from the consultation feedback that we're seeking to reflect now.
So in saying that you're seeing this increase, the significant increase, is this likely to continue to spike? Are we looking at a problem that might be nearly as big as the PPI claims, for example, for you?
I think at the moment we have 15,000 cases approximately on motor finance. That is a significant number of cases. Again, there probably is a practical difference from our perspective between those cases which relate to discretionary commission agreements, where the new rules have been put in place, and we would expect to see those if they come to us at all. Obviously, the best scenario would be if the banks are able to resolve those in a way that's satisfactory to customers at first pass. But if they don't, they'll come to us towards the end of the year. We are keeping a close eye on the volumes of non-discretionary commission agreement motor finance complaints, which are also more sizable than we've received in prior years.
So are you saying there's currently no backlog for you on this issue?
No, I would say that we still have a large number of open complaints to work through. The majority of them we've received in the last year. We've trained 110 people within the casework teams to deal with these complaints. Again,
how big is the backlog then?
I would have to confirm how many of those cases are over 12 months old. I'm afraid I don't have that with me. Again, quite a large number, several thousand we've received in the last few months, and we're working through them.
Can you supply that information to the committee?
Yes, of course.
How quickly are you able to process these once you've got
I will make a couple of points. One, our general complaint resolution time is now 3 months. So when I started, it was taking us 6.4 months to resolve a complaint. It's now gone down to 3. It's good, but that's still customers waiting, and we recognise that. For motor finance, it does typically take us longer. I would have to confirm how much longer. The reason for that is, one, the nature of the complaint is such that often the consumer does not know what commission agreement, which is very material to the case, they were actually subject to. They don't know if there was a discretionary commission arrangement behind the scenes. So we have had to, one, ask consumer customers to go back to their own paperwork if they have it, but two, work with businesses. And even the businesses have struggled a little, frankly, to give us the information we need to work those cases as quick as we'd like. I think we've fed all that back to the FCA. We've made referrals in a few cases where appropriate. I think businesses now better understand that expectation and are working with us better. But I will say it has probably taken us longer than is ideal to work through those individual cases. And of course, the decisions themselves, as you'll all appreciate, are quite significant. And the final decisions that we've issued also, we put, as you can imagine, care and attention into making sure we've really articulated our position on those cases.
Do you have concerns about your ability to deal with these if they increase dramatically?
I think it's a very movable picture at the moment. As I said, we've received a lot of cases in the last few months. I think that everything that I've described already around our digital transformation, around our ability to handle vulnerable customers better, around the fact that we've reorganised our team so that they're supporting specific types of products like motor finance, having a dedicated motor finance team, it will all help us, but we do need to keep a very close watch on this area.
We mentioned obviously earlier in the session about the impact of buy now, pay later agreements. Do you feel that there will be a bigger impact on the from the cost of living crisis in 24-25 than there was in 23-24?
I think it's quite, perhaps surprisingly, it's a little hard for me to identify a case that has directly been directly brought to us as a result of cost of living, because that's just not how consumer customers typically describe the problem.
But you must have an interpretation yourself.
Yeah, so for example, we are seeing a rising number of consumer credit cases. I think under the hood, you could say that's probably driven, at least in part, by cost of living.
Do you think there'll be a greater increase, was the question?
Yes, I think that we are likely to see some more consumer credit cases coming into next year. And again, that's really based on the last quarter of data, which wasn't available to us at the point we put the consultation budget together. And
finally, have you seen an increase, or are you concerned about an increase in any other types of cases that might be coming your way?
I think we've mentioned all the key areas for us, because the third one I would probably add is authorised push payment and mandatory reimbursement towards the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And just on the sort of origin story for these finance commission cases in the car sector, my understanding is that FOS decided to uphold some complaints that you'd previously been rejecting in this area, and that's what's prompted the FCA to act. Is that your understanding as well?
I think the FCA had previously put in their annual report a few years ago that motor finance was an area that they were looking at, and the commission arrangements in particular. I think they then subsequently went back and, as you know, banned some practices around discretionary commission arrangements in 2021. Subsequent to that, we hadn't had too many complaints in this area, in the hundreds, but in 2022-23 we started to see volumes increase. We flagged that to the FCA, and we started working through our lead decisions, which again, we shared the themes that we've been seeing across our casework with the FCA as well. And I think that played a part in the FCA deciding to take the action that they have had.
But you would not be acting on cases that predate 2021 then?
We have looked at cases where we are looking at the historic application of a discretionary commission arrangement and also the complaint handling around that. Yes, we're not solely concerned with how a business is responding post 2021, because we feel that the principles that the FCA had articulated prior to that point, and some other kind of legal and regulatory inputs as well, lead us to believe that businesses did not always treat the customers on a fair and reasonable basis before 2021 either.
But it could have been perfectly legal, and are you not concerned that you're being retrospective and inconsistent? My statutory underpinnings, or the statutory basis of the Financial Ombudsman Service, is to look at the law, to look at regulation, and to look at best practice at the time. So the bar for us is not just, was it legal? It's also, was it, a fair and reasonable treatment of a consumer customer. And our position is that when there's any arrangement between a consumer customer and a business, if commission forms a part of the conversation between, or if a commission is linked to an interest rate, for example, or a positive financial outcome is arrived at for the business, but the consumer might end up paying more for that, businesses should be transparent and make that clear to the consumer customers. If they made it transparent, then you would find in favour of the business.
I think that there's a lot of cases in this area. They relate to many different commission types. It's not a particularly straightforward picture in terms of what practices were in place in industry across different firms and at different times. And I think, again, as always, the position of the customer themselves, what was communicated to them, but also how, were they vulnerable or not, we would take all that into account. And it is probably quite difficult to generalise on across all the cases that we've got. We're still working through this as well.
Thank you. Angela.
Thank you very much. I want to ask about fractional timeshares. Could you tell me how many cases there are in your backlog related to fractional timeshares?
So we are, I don't have here how many cases are more than 12 months old that relate to fractional timeshares.
This goes back 6 years in terms of compensation and redress. So how many of those cases are you dealing with?
Yes, okay. So over the last 3 years, we've resolved 5,600 cases in this space. You may be aware that we were subject to a judicial review, which concluded in 2023.
2023.
Yes. And following that, we've issued a further 2,500 views, which is the first stage of our process. We still have a further 1,000 views approximately to issue, which we hope we will do before the end of this financial year, i.e. in the next few weeks. Normally, only if we issue a view, again the first stage of our process, only about 20% of those views are then challenged by either party. So only 20% go through to an Ombudsman decision. In this area, we've seen a higher referral rate. Parties on both sides of these disputes, have strong feelings about the rights and wrongs of the situation. So that may mean it takes us longer to fully resolve the cases, to move to the next stage and issue an Ombudsman decision. But every consumer with a fractional timeshare complaint should, we hope, receive our first stage answer by the end of this.
Well, that's 9,100 cases that you've referred to now. Are there any more in your backlog?
If you'd excuse me,
you must know
second.
how many people have contacted you with a case about being missold a fractional timeshare.
Yes, we have received we have. I'll come back to you with the exact details, but I know that we have resolved 5,600.
I'm going to ask you about those in a minute, but
yeah.
I'm asking you about your backlog, because this is a mis-selling issue, which companies were involved in selling upgrades and timeshare upgrades to people, and they were financed by banks, including Shawbrook Bank, Clydesdale Financial Services, Hitachi. You have decided that was mis-selling when with lead cases which you've resolved from that point of view. You were then subjected to judicial review because your remedy, as I understand it, was setting aside all the loan agreements for fractional timeshares, refunding all repayments that customers who bought these, were mis-sold these things, had made to the loans they took out from these banks, and then awarding 8% per annum interest from the date of loss to the resolution of the complaint. Now that is, although it was challenged in court, it wasn't challenged successfully by the banks. So the redress is there in black and white. It's not hard to interpret, and yet you're still not getting these people their money back nearly a year after the judicial review was taken. So when are you going to get them their money back? Because this is a clear case of mis-selling. You've found that. The banks concerned who don't want to be on the hook for repaying the money have taken you to court and lost. When are these people who've been mis-sold this dodgy product going to get all their money back with interest?
Well, first of all, I should say that not every case that we've received on this gets upheld by our service. We don't always find that has been followed, but we have sometimes, and indeed we took the litigation, as you mentioned, the judicial review. That was because it was our perspective as well that there is a significant number of consumer customers who have not been treated fairly and should receive their redress. I'm happy that we've been able to issue so many views in the period since the judicial review. I would like to be able to...
Nobody's got a penny back yet, have they? You've got your 2,500 views, and you hope to do another 1,000 views before the end of the financial year, but not a penny in recompense has been paid back to any of the people that were conned into buying these dodgy things. For the views, it is very likely that they will be opposed by one of the two parties in the dispute, the respondent business or the consumer, who sometimes is professionally represented. That does mean we have to then look at each case afresh. That is delaying us in closing these cases and making sure where appropriate that the consumer receives their redress. But again, I must stress, and I'm particularly conscious that we are an impartial service, we do not always find that the consumer is entitled to redress. Where we do, I think it is in the interest of all parties that the guidance that we've already issued on the cases and the guidance that became available at the end of the judicial review is followed. But it is the right of either party. Bother with the lead case if it doesn't resolve your caseload then?
So the lead cases have enabled us to issue the views. It is a matter of statute that if one party disagrees with the view, they can ask for an Ombudsman decision. But I agree with you that delays the resolution for the consumer customer. And to be honest, irrespective of whether or not we've upheld the consumer customer, that seems a pity to me as well. We'd like to be able to provide those consumers with finality. They have been waiting a long time.
So we are now saying that the lead case doesn't really resolve anything. You have to look at all the individual cases after you've been judicially reviewed to death by the banks that don't want to give a penny back. Is that an acceptable system for redress when people have been mis-sold a dodgy product, which everybody now recognises is dodgy, which you've issued very clear view on what your remedy should be, and it's basically not only should they get their money back, but they should get interest on the money that they've been paying back, as well as having the loan set aside.
Yeah.
Why can't this just then be dealt with? What is the point of doing a lead case if it's then got no implications whatsoever for any of the others? It's just delayed things for years.
So when we put forward a lead case and then it's judicially reviewed, more typically both parties accept the view as expressed in the judicial review and will simply take a view, or even sometimes take back the case because they think it has a limited prospect of success, or proactively settle it, for example, if it's the business. That often happens following a judicial review. For these particular consumer customers, that hasn't happened, and both parties have sought to ask us to review each case afresh using an ombudsman. Again, you are right, that does mean it will take longer for those consumer customers that are entitled to redress to get it. But that is the process as set out in FSMA that we have to follow.
How many more cases do you have to come to a review on, as you put it?
1,000.
And that's 1,000. It then? So we're only talking about 3,500 outstanding cases?
I will just double check.
Will you write to us?
And write
because
to us,
we would like to have the actual amounts. Now, why has not a single case since the High Court, why has not a single customer missold these dodgy timeshares had a penny of their money back?
I can't comment on the redress that gets paid to the customers. What I can comment on is the state of the cases that we hold with our service, and it's really the same picture that I've described previously, which is we have a certain number which we have fully resolved. That's the 5,600 I said originally. Then there is a further tranche that we have completed our first stage with some more to work through. And then, again, dependent on the parties, we may need to write decisions on each of those cases as well.
And how long
that
will
really
that
sets
take?
out our time frames.
If, for example, you said that 20% are usually challenged, but your implication in your answer to me was a lot higher percentage of these are going to be challenged, if not all.
Yes, 70% is the current
70%.
referral rate. Yes.
Why is the challenge rate so much higher in this instance than it is in other instances when you've had lead cases and come to a conclusion and suggested a remedy?
Because both parties in the case, both the respondent businesses and the consumers, again sometimes with the support of professional representatives, have chosen to ask for that second stage in higher numbers, and I think that just reflects the strength of feeling and the complexity of some of the arguments advanced as well. Again, it is their right to do that.
If you've got a lead case and you've got a remedy,
yes.
Why is that complex then? Because people have been sold these dodgy things. They've taken out loans with the banks I mentioned. Mm-hmm. The banks don't want to give the money back, but you've decided that they should. Why does every single case have to be relitigated again?
And the position of the Financial Ombudsman Service is very much that the judicial review clarified our position, and again in other similar situations where a judicial review has been successfully defended by the Financial Ombudsman Service, we have seen businesses or consumers choosing not to take matters further forward but abide by the decision. But that's simply not the case here, and we are bound by our process, which is to offer that second stage.
So there's an incentive for the banks that lost the judicial review to carry on arguing?
It would, as I say, it would elongate the process from the consumer's perspective. But again, it is not
These
solely...
timeshares are often bought by quite elderly people. Are they hoping they're just going to die in the meantime?
I couldn't comment on the bank's motives, but I would also say for fairness and balance that the claims management companies or professional reps are also referring cases to the Ombudsman decision, which again, for both sides, is their right. They're entitled to do that. However, we do remind all parties, professional representatives, but also respondent businesses, that we're in a situation where all businesses should be looking very carefully at our findings, because they're obligated to do that and take it into account. So we do remind them of that. But ultimately, if they're requesting the next stage review, it would it's something that we do have to do. And
there ought to be disincentives by increasing the interest rate the longer it takes. Do you have any deadline for dealing with these cases?
The same service standard applies to these cases as any other. Clearly, it has taken us much longer to resolve these cases than either we would like or is typical of the service. And that, I think, is a real shame. I sympathise with the position that the consumers are in here. Our key objective is to try and resolve as many of those outstanding cases as we can, but with quality.
After the initial stages being taken, what are the next stages before compensation and redress?
It would be, if required by one or other party, it would be an Ombudsman decision, and then that decision is legally binding. It can be rejected by the consumer. They could, if they wish, go back to court. But really, the key stage here is to either have a view that is accepted by both parties, which could be a matter of weeks for many of these customers that are outstanding, or have a decision which would normally take, just to give a sense of it, probably a further 3 months.
That's 3 months to work through the first one of the views, but how long will it take to work through 3,500?
We progress them in parallel. We don't do them sequentially. So as
soon as the first one is resolved, the rest are resolved. That's not how you do it. You've just told me each one has to be looked at individually.
We would work on many cases in parallel. But once the view has been issued, as soon as the consumer or business asks us to refresh it for an Ombudsman review, it would then go to the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman would then review it, and we would have multiple Ombudsmen working on these cases.
If the new FCA consumer duty had been in place when these fractional timeshare things were missold, would it have made any difference?
I think the consumer duty really points to the need to think about foreseeable harm, and these are very, very long-term products in their nature. So I think there would have been an emphasis on the business that sold them, making sure that, one, if the consumer's life circumstances changed, that was the implications of that were made very, very clear to the consumer. It would have had the requirement on the business that's selling the product to really explain exactly what is entailed in that purchase, what the terms and conditions were, and so on. I think it could only have helped, but I do go back to an answer I gave earlier, which is the Financial Ombudsman Service has always held businesses to a standard that is not the law and not even regulation, but a fair and reasonable treatment of customers, taking into account both the existing law and regulation at the time.
Hey, and just for the record, in terms of the complaint on your website, the 3 main providers of this finance were Shawbrook Bank, Clydesdale Financial Services trading as Barclays Partner Finance, and Navuna, previously known as Hitachi Capital. So I'm just reading that into the record. Keir.
Wonderful, thank you. I'd like to ask you some questions about the independent assessor and the complaints rate at the Financial Ombudsman Service. So in 22-23 there were 3,717 complaints, 649 of which were looked at by the independent assessor, so that's about 17% of cases. Is that a rate that the FOS is happy with, and do you think that represents kind of good scrutiny over the decisions that are taken in those cases?
Yes, first of all, those 649 independent assessor complaints, are against a backlog of 200,000 cases. So on the one hand, I think it's a positive that the number isn't excessively high. We'd be worried about that. But from a scrutiny perspective, you also want to make sure that anyone who does wish to knows that the independent assessor is there. The independent assessor performs a really important role for us. What I look at probably a little more closely than the absolute numbers, which do fluctuate a little year on year, is the breakdown where the independent assessor has said either there's no issue here, they're not in agreement with the consumer who's raised the issue, there's an issue but it has been already put right by the Financial Ombudsman Service. We're not perfect. We want to make sure that if we do not treat customers quite to the standards that we'd expect, we're putting it right very quickly. I think that's important too. And then the third category is where actually the service should have done more. When you look at that, the independent assessor found that to be the case in 163 cases, which, I'm absolutely sorry about. 0 would be a much better number, but it does indicate to me that the independent assessor is looking very closely at each case that comes to her and saying, well, could we have done more? And I think we've done a lot of work at the moment on our service complaints in general, which is absolutely appropriate because of the role that we do. We need to hold ourselves to at least the same standard as the standard we hold other businesses. And I'm happy on that front that our service complaints ratio, which is not just the independent assessor, but any complaint about our service, has reduced in the last year. But I'd like to see it go down further.
And if those figures are for 22-23, could you provide any more of a more recent snapshot that the committee might not have as to where you're at since then?
Yes, I'm absolutely happy to write back with that information. I will say that the underlying themes that the independent assessor are drawing out are quite consistent between this current year and last year. They're really around communication, making sure customers know what to expect from us and that we're really delivering on those promises, and also around timeliness, which, as you've heard, is a real priority for us.
Well, there is a separate point around the adequacy of investigations, and I know that the independent assessor said that most complaints about the FOS in 22-23 relate to the question of the adequacy of investigations. That's not customers complaining that they've not received an excellent service or an exceptional service, that's just an adequate one. And I wonder what more you think you could be doing to try and meet some of those concerns in the immediate term.
Yeah, so I think, again, we take every single recommendation from the independent assessor very seriously, and there's a number of different ways we are always seeking to improve in that area. One is in our initial training. We've completely revised our initial training programme, I think made it stronger, as we've opened more some more teams, like, for example, our regional hubs teams. That's really helped us get them up to speed quickly, and I think that goes back to the emphasis that we try and bring on quality and consistency. We're also looking for next year at, again, the knowledge management that we provide. We want to make that as structured and as easy to use as possible, so that investigators and ombudsmen can get to the right answer fairly but also quickly. And again, also trying to make sure that where we have dedicated areas that need kind of more specialist support, we're putting that in place as well. And I gave some examples earlier from the SME team where we're using an expert group. We're looking at actually recruiting some more very targeted experts too in specific areas for our general casework, not the small business specifically, but for everyone, to make sure we have that expertise. And that might, for example, give us expertise around quite complex kind of medical insurance cases, for example. So from the beginning, when someone starts with us, through to those really quite unusual cases that you don't see every day but require a specialist level of attention, we're trying to think about the whole range.
I note that the assessor can assess the adequacy of investigations, but not the quality. I'll do it.
Please don't worry about the bell.
So the assessor can assess the adequacy of investigations, but not the quality of decisions. But wouldn't looking at the quality of decisions better enable the assessor to judge whether a case was carried out adequately?
I described earlier our two-stage process. That's really where we look at the adequacy of the decision. An investigator looks at all the facts, makes a decision, and communicates that to both parties. We then will use our QA process. 1 in every 17 of those get QA'd. One of the QA questions is effectively, did the investigator come to the right outcome? Did they make the right recommendation? Then, if either party is unhappy, it can be referred to an ombudsman. Again, we use our quality assurance process 1 in every 25 cases to make sure we are coming to consistent outcomes, and we're doing so, again with quality throughout the life cycle.
So, is there a specific reason why the independent assessor can't look at the quality of decisions when they're assessing the adequacy of cases? Is there a sort of a good reason for that? Because
the independent assessor's role is really to look at the customer service that we provide, not the decisions that we make. Again, our process is geared around the Ombudsman decision being final and binding. So of course we put a lot of thought into how we ensure the quality of an Ombudsman decision, but that's not really the independent assessor's remit to consider.
Is there a mechanism for the assessor to say if they were investigating the adequacy of an investigation and found it to be suboptimal and to have produced an inadequate decision, is there recourse for them to be able to say, this doesn't look right to me, can you take another look?
The nature of the feedback of the independent assessor to our board is more around, again, the kind of customer service aspects. If someone doesn't agree with a view, then either party, they can essentially ask for it to be reworked afresh by an ombudsman. If the ombudsman decision is challenged while it is legally binding on the business, the consumer can reject it if they so wish. There is the potential that a consumer could take that matter to court. That would be a very big step for the consumer, and it rarely happens, but it is available to them.
How do senior management at the Financial Ombudsman Service assure themselves that caseworkers are making the right decisions if an independent assessor can't assess their quality?
Yes, so we look at a number of different factors. So one is, and it's back to the point on consistency, we look at how often an ombudsman overturns the decision already made by an investigator. That's quite rare. So if you took 100 cases, 80 of them would be resolved at the first stage, typically, with some exceptions, as I discussed earlier, and 20% get referred to an ombudsman. We look at those 20 cases and say, how often has that changed from the ombudsman looking at it to when the investigator looks at it? It's actually only about 7% of the time.
Right.
So we typically find that our investigators and ombudsmen are coming to the same conclusions. And I'm not surprised by that. We have case clinics so that when we're discussing our approach, anyone who's working in that particular practice area can listen, learn and contribute to how that case should be decided. We share findings when significant cases are issued. They're shared with the relevant group in the service who work that type of cases. And again, our knowledge management system is designed to allow ombudsmen and investigators to understand what considerations have been brought to bear in similar cases in the past.
And does the quality team that was set up in 2021-22 have a role in assessing those decisions, and how does that role sort of manifest itself?
Yes, so we have a quality team that I believe was set up before my time, but we've subsequently refreshed it. Again, they would look at the QA assessments, including an assessment of whether or not the appropriate outcome has been reached. We actually have done quite a bit of work to refresh our quality framework quite recently, and one of the steps that we took was make sure that when you look at the number of cases they're sampling, that gives us a kind of a high confidence level so that we can proceed on a confident basis, and we know that we're doing our job to the best of our ability. I think we put a lot of thought into this area, and I should perhaps add, perhaps should have started this, the quality team are deliberately separate from the casework team so that there's no incentive for them to say that a case is of high quality when it's not. We'd absolutely expect them to call that out and to draw attention to any findings.
From the independent assessor's notes, one of the things that particularly struck me was where she said, of the reviews where I found communication to be unsatisfactory, I've made recommendations and or learning points on 56%, which highlights the service has failed to adequately put things right in the majority of cases. And, as you've said earlier, and as Dame Angela has referenced, if you're dealing with kind of older people or people who, are in real financial difficulty as a result of decisions that have been taken, this is the human interaction piece of the Financial Ombudsman Service's work. What do you think is going wrong in relation to those cases, and what do you think can be done to fix it?
Perhaps I can just double check some numbers that you've got there and write back to you, because I think that it's roughly a third, no issue, but the Financial Ombudsman Service sort of casework team have already put that right, or there was a problem that we should have addressed. I think that we take our role with regard to vulnerable customers really seriously. I very briefly touched on it earlier. One of the things that we've done over the past few years was it used to be the case that vulnerable customers were, if they identified as such, they were referred to a specialist team. That sounds great. In practice, it meant sometimes it took too long for that smaller team than our general population to be able to deal with those customers. In trying to help those customers more, I felt that sometimes they were actually not able to help as well as they could. So instead, we have now taken an approach where every single caseworker will receive really in-depth training on vulnerability. And again, I think this ties back to some recommendations the IA has made previously, and hopefully will reduce the number of complaints that comes to her team.
If you could just clarify the numbers in the correspondence
Yes.
that you share with us after the session,
Absolutely.
that'd be fantastic. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Keir. John.
Thanks, Chair.
Good morning. Can I just raise with you a few issues? Actually, I raised with you about a year ago when you were in front of us, including hybrid working and so forth, but also kick off with staff attrition, churn rate, employees leaving the organisation. I mean, the figures are gently improving. It's been the attrition rate when it comes to staff has reduced from 26% to 17%, still higher than the target of 15%, and the 17% still higher than it was in 2021. Can you just comment on this? Are attrition rates in new investigators still particularly high? Where are the weak points when it, as far as you're concerned?
So I recognise the trend that you've described and the numbers that you've stated. I do have some slightly more recent information which shows that overall attrition rate is now closer to 14% and below target in a positive manner. So that is good for us and it's good for our customers too. We did find there was a period where our newer investigators were leaving in higher numbers. I don't believe that to be the case. I can check that. But yes, overall we are reasonably positive about our attrition rate. I think it is a good result considering the operational nature of the work that we do, and we monitor it closely. We've put some work also into our overall, we would call it a reward strategy, looking at the overall pay and benefits arrangements for our staff. That was very much designed to keep us in that healthy place where the attrition is, within target levels. I think that will help going forward as well.
Okay, I mean, you appreciate the importance of this issue because by the very nature of your work, long cases can take some time, and therefore having consistency and continuity when it comes to staff is terribly important. I mean, just following up on a point that Keir was pursuing, and about the complaints with regards to FOS. I mean, your latest advertisement, and correct me if I'm wrong, current job advertisements for investigator role advert favours general case handling skills over financial knowledge. I mean, do you think you're getting the balance right? Because some experience and expertise with financial knowledge I thought would have been essential for the job.
I don't think it's essential. I do think it's helpful. But I think it's about having a balance of skills across the team. So on the one hand, I firmly believe good customer service is good customer service anywhere. And there's a lot that can be brought to bear on behalf of our consumer customers to speak to someone who can take a step back and say, well, yes, setting aside the intricacies of some of these products, there are just some basics here that weren't observed. So I think having a range of skills where on the one hand you've got people from a more generalist background, but on the other hand we do have some really deep financial expertise as well, and to your point,
that's the key point, isn't it? You've got to, at some point, you've got to have some deep financial expertise.
Yes.
Yeah. Otherwise you're not going to be coming to adequate and just decisions, are you?
I think that's correct, and that's why when I started, the Financial Ombudsman Service was organised such that the casework teams pretty much could handle almost any case day to day. So you could in principle, do a pensions case in the first week of the month and then turn to travel insurance in the second week of the month. And I'm not, as an individual caseworker, and I'm not sure that was really the best approach. So how we have changed that now is make sure that every single person in our casework team is assigned to an industry sector, and within that normally a subsector as well. So for example, you're an insurance caseworker, but you might specialise in travel insurance or pet insurance, for example. And that, I think, gives that nice blend that you referred to, where yes, you understand the principles of good service and good customer handling, but also day in, day out, you're looking at a reasonably similar type of cases with some flexibility. So we are a demand-led service, as some of the comments made earlier indicate. We do need to recognise that there will be points where we have to ask someone to perhaps cross-train so that they can deal with a different case type, and provide us with a bit of additional capacity in an area where the demand might certainly be much higher than we initially expected. But broadly, all the people in my team are now aligned to those industry sectors. I think they prefer it because it gives them greater professional expertise. I've heard repeatedly from industry stakeholders that they prefer it too. It's definitely a good approach for us, and one that we're always seeking to evolve but are happy with.
Thank you. Can I just follow up on the issue of vulnerable customers?
Yes.
I mean, there's obviously, none of us are immune to the headlines about AI and intelligent automation and digital portals and all the rest. But, I mean, what are you doing to ensure that where vulnerable customers need to make adequate contact with FOS, that they're not being confronted by this welter of technology which can be off-putting?
Well, I mean, the first thing I should say is, again, we operate a channel of choice policy. So if a customer wants to call us, they can call us and they can speak to a human. That is absolutely fine. I will always make the point that there are some customers who genuinely don't want to speak to a person. I discussed that earlier, and would prefer to raise a case online. So we put more work into our online presence because I think that helps that type of customer. But no, you can always ring us, and it is a person who is dealing with you on the other end of the phone.
Can you reassure us about intelligent automation? I mean, what is it actually doing within FOS, and can you provide some assurance that human beings are making the ultimate decisions at the end of the day rather than some souped-up computer?
Yes, I can do both. So I can absolutely assure you that a human makes an ombudsman decision. That's set out in FSMA. That is a very clear requirement that an ombudsman needs to make the final decision. So that's one aspect at that end of the scale. But it would be remiss to neglect the opportunities that machine learning or AI could offer to our service as well. So we have been doing some work to look at where it could help us. So I'll give a couple of practical examples. When a case comes into the service, previously one of the we call them the front door team, would need to read that whole case through and label it. So for example, they might label it as travel insurance. We've now implemented a form of machine learning that scans the case, spots keywords like, for example, overseas injury, and says, I think this is travel insurance, and labels the case appropriately. That's live, that's working for us today. We actually find the accuracy of it is pretty high.
I say pretty high. I mean, I can see plenty of room for error in this. I mean, what do you mean by pretty high?
Over 80%, but first of all, that's higher than when people originally did that work, so right. That's positive. And secondly, it can always be overwritten by the caseworker. So when the caseworker receives the case, if they start reading through it and find actually that's not a travel insurance case, it's a different type of insurance policy, they can simply relabel it. So, and that's how we're seeking to use AI, not to substitute for a person, but to provide some guidance that a person can then check. That's the balance for me between speed and efficiency, but being really confident that we've got it right.
It sounds to me as though you've got AI right at the moment. It's a constantly moving target, this one. So what you're saying to the committee is that there is no evidence that the introduction or involvement of AI is in any way delaying cases. If anything, it's helping you.
Oh, no, absolutely. And the test that we would always check is, is it achieving the right level of accuracy? Is it, again, as you say, like helping us to maintain our quality but perhaps increase our pace? But with that second check, that a person can always at present overwrite the conclusions that the computer is drawing. It's a helpful assist, not a substitution.
Lovely. Abby, finally, March last year, I questioned you about hybrid working and productivity levels and so forth, and you had just about introduced the 4 days in 10 modus operandi and so forth, and you said your productivity levels hadn't suffered. If anything, they were improving. I mean, can you give us an update on that? How's it going? Because in many respects, your type of work possibly could ideally suit some, hybrid working.
Yes, so I think it had been introduced at the point that I attended the committee. We do find it works well for us, and we do have also colleagues who are now working in regional hubs who actually attend slightly less frequently but have a check-in every single day online with a manager. So we're looking at different models. I think that across the whole service, we measure productivity broadly as a measure of how many resolutions we are able to achieve on behalf of our customers against how many caseworkers have been involved, in
up to
supporting
3
those
a week,
resolutions.
weren't you, last time?
Yes, so 3 a week in some areas. I think that our productivity has improved over the last year if, and this is an important caveat, if you exclude the fact that some resolutions, about 16,000 last year, were delivered on a bulk basis, so no human touched those cases. They were bulk resolved after one of the companies, one of the respondent businesses went into financial difficulties. Once you take those resolutions out of the mix, our productivity has gone up about 9% this year, and we are very positive about the results of our transformation programme. We think that our productivity should go up by a further 14% next year, as some of the initiatives that we've put in place this year really bear fruit for the whole 12 months of next year. So from a productivity perspective, we think it's improving. We think there is more to do. We think our hybrid working arrangements broadly suit the nature of the work that we do, but always keeping an eye on it.
Always keeping an eye on it.
Yeah.
All right, lovely. Many thanks to you.
Thank you very much, John. Therese.
Thank you very much, Abby. I wanted to just briefly talk about, you've been so efficient that you have surplus in your funding operation. So just tell us if you're still on track to reduce that surplus, or is there a risk it could get even higher?
So yes, we do have plans to reduce the surplus. As a not-for-profit, it's really important that we can cover our costs, and in some years the Financial Ombudsman Service historically hasn't managed to make sure that the costs were slightly lower than the income, which is our desired ratio. I'm very happy that we're not in that position, and we are now covering our costs and a little bit more, as you're drawing attention to. Equally, it's not appropriate for us to sit on more money than we need. That wouldn't be helpful to anyone. So the way that we are seeking to address that is, one, to invest further in our transformation programme. So we have ambitious plans for next year to go further in the digital space in particular, as I've mentioned, and that will, we expect our reserves to contribute, or surplus I should say, not the reserves themselves, the surplus reserves should contribute to that transformation programme. And secondly, we have looked at and consulted on reducing our case fees as well, because if we become more efficient, we should reflect that, I believe, in our charging, again, in light of our not-for-profit status.
And in terms of, you were suggesting you go to £650 for the case fee. When do you anticipate being able to announce that you can make that for the next financial year?
That's subject to budget confirmation, which is coming up in the next few weeks, I would hope.
Okay. And in terms of, you're planning to use 13.7 million reserves to fund that transformation. What exactly will it entail, and how do you anticipate that you'll have spent the money well? Because I assume it should improve service delivery.
Yes, it's absolutely designed to improve service delivery. So there's a number of different ways. One, we have achieved quite a bit of progress on consumer self-service online this year. The consumer satisfaction has gone up by 20 points for those consumers that have used our website to raise a case to us. And perhaps more importantly even than that, we have found that when consumers go online to raise a case to us, 30% fewer of those cases require us to go back to the consumer and say, could you give us some more information? And I think that's really positive because it means we're valuing the time of that consumer customer, we're telling them up front exactly what we need, and they're giving it to us so that we can work their cases much more quickly. I think that's really positive for the consumers and actually for the businesses on the other side of the complaint as well. I think that there's quite a bit more we could do in terms of our online journey. I'd like to make sure that we are getting those cases once raised to the caseworkers more quickly. I'd like to make sure it's really easy for a consumer to use our website. And I would like to give more tools to the caseworkers that, to the point that was made a little earlier, eventually will pick up the case. So, for example, today, we auto-allocate a case that comes in to an investigator. When I started, an investigator would have to go to a spreadsheet, find a case reference, check if anyone else was working it, check that it was the right kind of case for them, and then request that case to be released to them. That's very lengthy. That doesn't help our consumers. Now that is auto-allocated. We would like to extend that to Ombudsman to just make that process as efficient as possible. There are other similar innovations like that we're working on.
That's like £30 million. It's quite a lot of money to develop auto-allocation. But one of the things I'm sure your staff, I know Mr. Barron's just covered quite a lot of this, is, or is it Sir John nowadays? I can't remember. Okay. It is about staff retention, and I'm conscious that whether any consideration was given about changes to the salary rise, recognising some of the reserves to help with retention, because experience must surely be a factor in how and in making sure the cases are covered efficiently and effectively.
Yes, so we, as I said earlier, we have experienced a reduction in our attrition rate, which we're very happy about. Although we've been through a lot of change as a service year on year, our employee engagement has remained steady, which we're also very happy about. I think that from a salary perspective, we gave what we consider to be a healthy but also competitive and fair increase to staff last year. This year, we actually took a step back and looked at every member of staff, sort of broadly grouped them in professions, and then benchmarked those professions, the skills that they require, the level that they're at, and the region as well that we were recruiting from, to make sure that we were absolutely competitive in our marketplace. You know, we're a not-for-profit. I will say openly, we never expect to pay, you know, the top rates in the marketplace, but we do want to be healthily above average. And the recent work we did on benchmarking demonstrated that was very often the case.
Did you try and go into second quartile, or?
Yes, that's right. Yes,
okay.
Second quartile, with the top being the higher paid.
Why 3 months? Recognising that, of course, you can be drawn upon if there's a significant systemic failure. You've got just over 7 at the moment. Why choose 3?
I think we're actually looking at that at the moment. I can't comment on what will eventually be decided. And of course, it would be a matter where we would seek the guidance of the FCA from their oversight committee as well. I think 3 to 5 months might feel a little more comfortable for us. So we're just looking at the policy, but I'm afraid I can't confirm at the moment exactly where we'll end up as our policy level of reserves.
I think at the moment your policy is to go to 3, but you're suggesting there is a potential it could be reconsidered.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
okay.
Potential.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Great. I don't think any colleagues are trying to catch my eye with any further questions, but we do have a long list of pieces of data that you have offered to the committee that you will send them information about. We've also got your commitment to comment more on the Sunday Times case, and so what we'll do is we'll follow up with our clerks to ensure you've got that full list, and you can send us that further evidence via letter.
Thank you.
So if there are no further questions, I'm going to declare this session over. Thank you very much. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.